I learned something new this week in pursuit of this sermon because I learned that it was a meteorologist named Edward Lorenz who gave us the term the butterfly effect. Even if you haven't heard of the term or not familiar with it, I'm sure you're familiar with the idea. Lorenz ran weather simulations. It was part of his work. Vast amounts of information. He ran it through mathematical formulas, and what the number crunching spit out could help us anticipate everything from tomorrow's high temperature to the likelihood that a Caribbean storm would become the next hurricane. Math could save lives when it came to dangerous weather. It could also tell you if you needed an umbrella today. But Lorenz found out that in the midst of all of those numbers, in the midst of all of that data, tiny little changes in conditions, even to the point of rounding up to the 1,000th place, could lead to vastly different outcomes. Now, thankfully, Lorenz knew how to talk to people. So in explaining this, he put it the way, the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil could set off a tornado in Texas. Hence the name. Now, poetic license, of course, but you get the idea. There is far more interconnectedness out there than you and I could ever appreciate. Some of that interconnectedness is a good thing, right? Right? Our winter farmers market, for instance. I went down there and I bought some apples. I looked at the apples. They don't look like the apples from the store. Knowing the reason why they look the way they do, different from the shiny behemoths that you get at the grocery store, is that that orchard in particular doesn't bathe its apples in pesticide. This interconnectedness is relationship, right? You get to know the farmer who grows your vegetables. You get to know the family and how they go about raising their chickens that then produce those brown eggs with the deep golden yolks. You foster that interconnection of knowing what you eat, what you have, what you need, and where it comes from. But it cuts both ways, doesn't it? We like knowing the apple orchard. We like knowing where we get these smaller, less perfect, pesticide-controlled apples. We like knowing where food comes from, where things come from. I know I do. But I'm less sure about other things. Sure, absolutely. Tell me about your apples. But oh no, absolutely not. Do not tell me how my Apple iPhone is made. Yes, share with me how this coffee co-op provides a fair wage for family farms in Yemen. But ignorance is bliss when it comes to how I keep my iPhone charged. I'm glad to know about the life of the chicken that laid these eggs, but the life of Congolese miners who dig for cobalt, the very cobalt my phone battery depends on. Ooh, that's something different altogether. So do me a favor. Lay your hands on your smartphone, if you would, friends. I'm going to assume you have one. 91% of all adults in the United States do. We said in our Bible study today that it's almost, you almost need to have one. I'll tell you, I left my iPhone in the office. It's a few years old, maybe yours is too. It's a few models behind. At very best, my battery functions around 80%, which according to Apple is about the time I need to get a new iPhone. So that phone in your hand, or the laptop that's back at home on the desk, the garage that has your power tools, cordless, your electric toothbrush, most modern charging, whatever, they all run on lithium-ion batteries, and lithium-ion batteries run on cobalt. Your toothbrush, your new cordless drill, depends on the battery that depends on this hard silver gray metal called cobalt. It's absolutely essential for the things that much of your and my life depends on. And so, in a real way, we all depend on cobalt. We all depend on the Democratic Republic of Congo. Congo for short, formerly Zaire. No less than 75% of the world's cobalt ends up in our pockets and purses by way of the Congo. Now, despite talking about ethical sourcing, the blind eye turned on the Congo means that truly no meaningful enforcement exists to either pay these miners decently or provide even remotely safe working conditions. The blind eye never wants to see the miners who dig and tunnel for what you and I depend on. The closed-off ears of far-off disconnectedness hardly ever hear the stories of these men and women and children who work in the mines. Cobalt veins are often underground, like most metals are. So they tunnel to extract even the highest grade. Tunnels collapse so very regularly. Miners die so very frequently that it's simply accepted. Not a matter of if, but always when. Is anything done about it? You know the answer. No. Why? The labor supply is far greater than any initiative, any incentive to make the work safer, no matter the unsupported tunnels, no matter the unsafe, toxic water that the children bathe the ore in, no matter the criminal enterprises at work, or no matter the danger facing women and girls at the hands they face at the foreman. There will always just simply be enough, we believe, enough willing, enough poor, enough hungry miners who will dig for cobalt, and always enough people like me, so readily ignorant. People like me who depend on the ore they provide, often with their very lives, and always, it seems, with their very health. The degrees of separation from you and I, from us to that Congolese miner who works in these dangerous and deadly mines is, as you know, it's stunning, especially now if you're only hearing about this for the first time. If you have an iPhone, that piece of technology goes through upwards of 50 countries before it lands in your pocket. Components from 43 of those countries are assembled predominantly in China. Most of that cobalt ends up in China. China is the main producer of the world's batteries. And knowing that helps me appreciate how deeply insulated I am by degrees of separation. By the sheer global scale of production and manufacturing, it encourages my ignorance. Because, I mean, come on, it's so much easier to understand how those apples make it to my table compared to how Apple puts that phone in my pocket. When Jesus visits Nazareth early in the Gospel of Luke, he encounters resistance from his hometown. Dismissive, skeptical, they want a display of power. Famously, Jesus fires back at them. Doubtless you will quote me this proverb, "Doctor, cure yourself." Doubtless. I love that word. Doubtless you will find all manner of arguments as to why things are the way they are, why they cannot change, why we can't really do much in response, even when we know. Doubtless folks will quote stories about all the rising costs associated that always come with safer and ethical mining, and doubtless folks will quote facts and figures about, these self-determinations of Congolese miners. They're not slaves. They choose to work willingly. Doubtless we'll all hear about how the ways of the world belong to us. Doubtless you'll hear of the earth's minerals, its soil, its bounty belonging to us. I remember my high school quarterback from the football team. In the locker room, after a game, quoting scripture like a preacher, he made his case for the inherent goodness of the marijuana he so thoroughly enjoyed. Like a zealot, quoting chapter and verse, Genesis 1, Psalm 104. In Genesis it says, "See, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth." Aha, he said. Psalm 104, it says that God gives us plants. And so with the total confidence of someone so convinced that all of these wonderful plants were for people to use, he extolled the virtues of his favorite herb. The word of the Lord, he said. Jesus was right, maybe not Matt, the quarterback, because doubtless those red-eyed quarterbacks might say that all the plants for all the people have value, but only their value comes with our use. And so marijuana is a plant after all, and we should use it, he said. And doubtless ever-expanding cattle ranchers clear-cut forests because God gives us the power over the natural world to do so, and there's a market for it. And doubtless there are all sorts of folks, I remember as I moved here from Pennsylvania, so gung-ho on fracking, which even sounds dirty to say it from church. On fracking, drilling, all that, because there are sufficient resources, they said, Brett. They're there. We have to choose to extract them. That perspective is called dominion. God-given dominion over the earth, as though God handed us the keys to creation. And with dominion often comes that sense of license, that sense that we will model our own use of power based off what we know about God's use of power. We'll say that God gives us the authority, and so we will give ourselves the right to manage the earth as we were the ones sitting on the throne of heaven. Cattle, cobalt, cucumbers, oh my. They come from near and from far away, but they all depend on the natural order, All of it's an occasion to consider. Then what truly constitutes the power of God, the power given to us, and what it means for the church to believe that we are stewards of creation, stewards of how power is lived out in Christ, how that power is modeled on the cross. The Gospel of John says that Jesus was God manifest, right? God incarnate. The Message puts it this way: the Almighty became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. Christ engaged the Word fully. Christ encounters the world. His incarnation is at the fullest extent when he dies upon the cross. Ideas of dominion reign still in the time of Christ as they do today. Both then and now, seeing dominion as total permission to do what we want with the world is idolatrous. It's an idol. To believe dominion is permission to see ourselves as little gods. It's our own golden calf. And we have made it of what we value most, unchecked autonomy, rather than stewardship. It's the extractive, exploitive dominion mindset, makes creation a commodity for the wealthy, and makes the people to be found there to be never treated with the same permission. Friends, there isn't a cobalt mine to be found in all of Congo that sees individual miners as people. People equally beloved, inherently worth-filled. Men, women, children, means of production. Men, women, children, those in the tunnels, they are the machines that power the shovels. Friends, we're not called to dominion. We're not called to wrestle down the places into submission. We're not called to subdue people near and far for our idolatrous end. The cross should transform our perception of power. Christ incarnate among us transformed the world not into dominion, but into relationship, not into power, but into kinship, into witness Christ's power seen on the cross. It's subversive. Resurrection turns it all inside out. This is the power God has given to us all. And if there is a world to subdue, we should take dominion to subdue the wild exploitation of it. To subdue and wrestle into compliance the ignorance that fosters disconnecting one of us from the other. I don't know about you, I was in some ways ensorcelled and enraptured with the coverage of Pope Francis's funeral and death. I'm reminded in his passing of one of his most significant works, an encyclical letter whose Latin translates, "Peace be to you." It comes from a hymn attributed to St. Francis, his namesake. The letter was a call to see the urgent need for the care of the earth, to reframe creation as our common home for all of us, and that it's not simply a venue of dominion. Francis wrote in 2015 that the earth herself has become burdened and laid waste, and creation exists today as among the most abandoned and most maltreated of all of our poor. Francis wrote that seeing the creation as a common good, as belonging to all, meant for all, meant that the first order of restoration will begin with you and I seeing the interconnectedness of all things. He wrote that it cannot be emphasized enough how everything is interconnected. And if creation was going to be exercised, if we were going to extract out and simply exercise out the idolatry of dominion and power, then many things will need to change course, but he writes that it's you and I who need to change above all else. But the quote that stands out for me most here on this Earth Day Sunday reminds me of that passage we heard from Revelation. Jesus Christ, faithful witness, first begotten of the dead, Prince of the kings of earth. Christ, the power he brings, the power of God that he models on the cross, kinship, relationship, as if a prince, as if not a king, but a prince, a ruler of a new reign. It was that new reign that Francis saw as our chance to leave an inhabitable planet for both generations, future generations that suffer because of what our idolatrous dominion does to the earth. This man was not perfect by any stretch. None of us are. But these imperfect servants, I leave you with his words. A true ecological approach, he writes, always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor.